Does France want to join BRICS? Is Paris sending its love to the Organization of Developing Nations? Is this a sign that BRICS is entering the big leagues?
This is very interesting. The fact that France wants to sit in and perhaps even join the BRICS nation is very interesting because not only is it the first overt country in Europe expressing this idea, it also shows that there might be a regime shift in the future, not only for France, but for the rest of the world today. If I were to ask you which countries today have the most influence in our modern age, would you say it's the G7? Or perhaps you would add a few countries onto the G7 and say G20. It's definitely not the antiquated Commonwealth because the sun has definitely set at the British Empire. Perhaps you're going to say the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. NATO, right? NATO is quite powerful today and it does definitely have a lot of influence. And perhaps countries that are not aligned with NATO, like Russia and its allies, China, Brazil, India, South Africa, the BRICS nations as well, right? So we see it's NATO against BRICS nations. And what's really interesting, if Macron and France are actually genuinely eager or just want to sit in, I think this might be a chess move where they're just sitting in, hearing what they're saying, and he's just interested in the whims of what's happening in this meeting. I don't think it's a serious offer because even though it is an overt offer, France isn't really probably going to change its tune. It's still going to be part of NATO. And NATO and BRICS are the ones that are sort of going head to head under the table, but it's nothing really overt. We see India and China are still quite, trade partners with a lot of the NATO countries involved in today's global affairs. And so if France were to not only sit in Johannesburg in August in South Africa's meeting, if BRICS were to accept France part of BRICS, I don't think it would happen soon. I think there would be many more countries before France, and this would include people that have already applied, like Saudi Arabia. What I find very interesting is how the French president Macron was using the French reporters to send a message to the South African president, Cyril Ramaphosa, requesting to sit in August's Johannesburg meeting in South Africa that will basically inaugurate the 15th annual BRICS summit meeting between the 22nd and 24th of August. Now we know that the head of states will be attending this Johannesburg 15th annual BRICS summit meeting, and that people around the world, part of NATO, have been requesting that South Africa arrest the head of state of Russia, Putin, as he arrives. Here's what South Africa thinks regarding that idea.
South Africa is a treaty member of the International Criminal Court. If Putin comes here in August as planned, your government will be obliged to arrest him. As head of the ANC, do you believe your government should and indeed will arrest Vladimir Putin?
If it was according to the ANC, we will want President Putin to be here even tomorrow.
You would?
To come to our country. But
you would welcome Vladimir Putin here right now?
Of course we will welcome.
A man who is being investigated for war crimes by the International Criminal Court.
We will welcome him to come here as part and parcel of BRICS, but we know that we are constrained by the ICC in terms of doing that. Putin is a head of state. Do you think that a head of state can just be arrested anywhere? How many crimes have your country committed in Iraq? How many crimes have everyone else who's so vocal today committed in Iraq and Afghanistan? Have you arrested them? You
know the impact that this stand of yours...
You're making a lot of noise about Putin instead of working for peace between Ukraine and Russia, and you failed to resolve the war. Where are the weapons of mass destruction? Tony Blair went to Iraq and claimed that they are weapons of mass destruction. Did we see anybody standing against that in the United Kingdom and Britain? More than millions of people have died in Iraq and Afghanistan, and there are no weapons of mass destruction. We know what the war is about.
Mr. Secretary General,
between Russia and Ukraine. We want peace. That's what is important, so that the world can thrive. And organs and institutions of the world that institute world peace must not be conspicuous by their silence in deciding decisively.
We don't
to
have much
bring
time
about
left. I
peace.
just want.
If Macron does show up, will he use his influence to arrest Putin? I highly doubt that because, like the guy said, it's just you don't just arrest a head of state willy-nilly. Alongside the head of states of the BRICS nations, there'll be many countries attending with their not only foreign ministers, perhaps a lot of their head of states as well. We know some of the friends of BRICS that are already invited to this upcoming meeting include Bangladesh, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, Egypt, So France wanting to sit in there, he has to get along with a lot of these countries. If France was not being serious and they were just basically gaslighting the whole process of just showing up, then it might be a little bit more challenging as we see BRICS versus NATO and its allies go head to head in the future when it comes to commodity wars. Now, BRICS right now is heavily commodity based and holds quite a bit of GDP for the globe and its populations. NATO and its allies also do hold quite a bit of GDP, population, and other influences regarding geopolitical powers. If France were to choose a side, it definitely won't be BRICS, it will definitely be with NATO. Before France can be accepted into the BRICS nations, there are countries already waiting in line that have applied way before France, such as Egypt, and Egyptian companies are very excited into that admission.
It's absolutely one of the main assets that we can take advantage of by joining BRICS and by joining the new development bank. We need to facilitate our trade, whether in import and export. And one of the things that hinders this supply chain and this process is the availability of foreign currency.
Now, Egypt does have a leg up before France getting admitted into the BRICS nation because BRICS has its own bank, the New Development Bank that I've covered in my other BRICS video. Now, the New Development Bank, not only does it have the 5 BRICS countries, it also has Uruguay, Egypt, Bangladesh, and the UAE as well. So they're already part of an organization established by BRICS. So it would just be common sense, a lot more easier to accept Egypt over France or any other European country that shows interest. Yes, that includes Germany. We see that the last time BRICS has actually had somebody accepted into their circle, it was called BRIC at that time. It was just Brazil, Russia, India, and China. And in 2011, they accepted South Africa. I think one thing that will be highly covered during this August meeting in Johannesburg during those 3 days in August 22nd to the 24th is putting together and implementing a policy to accept new members and under what conditions, and perhaps what can they bring to the table.
Looking at institutional development of BRICS or expansion, we have concluded that we haven't as yet got what we believe is a useful document that we could place before the heads of state. So more work will need to be done on this matter. It is still to be processed, and once we have a document that we believe offers clear guidance, we will then take that to the summit in August.
One thing is for certain, that BRICS definitely does want to expand, especially since what's going on between Russia and Ukraine and NATO, by extension, they would want to basically bolster and strengthen their reach. Sanctions that the West has implemented on Russia has basically opened up a new frontier of basically weaponizing the US dollar and the treasury bonds held by many countries around the world, and signaling to the planet that this may happen to you if the US does not like you. And so many countries are basically flocking towards BRICS and applying, because we see that if this de-dollarization event does take place, the commodity-based world might actually take into effect, and having a basket of currencies not only backed by commodities like South Africa has proposed in the past will not only strengthen Africa's position in entering into the BRICS nation, but so would the global South. Today we see NATO is no longer really interested in developing and helping people come out of poverty in many countries in the global south, but perhaps BRICS may be that person that the global south is looking to assist in developing their economies. We see that China is very much interested in expanding the participants in the BRICS nations and expanding that bloc by meeting with other head leaders from around the world that will eventually not only apply but also perhaps be considered into there. And yes, that includes French President Macron in that list.
I believe the enlargement of the BRICS will be beneficial to the BRICS countries, beneficial to developing countries, and to increase the representation influence of this mechanism, and also to garner bigger power of the BRICS to serve the interests of developing countries and emerging market economies, as well as the international development cause.
Using your media as a proxy to request an invite to the 15th annual BRICS summit isn't really a good look. Russia and other countries are trying to ask France, why do you want to be invited? Is this just another Trojan horse that you guys historically have been doing? Only wait and see, so make sure to subscribe so you can catch that. Now, I don't think France is serious about actually joining the BRICS nation. I think they're just virtue signaling because they just want to show up and just sit there. Because just last month in May, the French president has said about China that the greatest challenge to global security and prosperity in our time. Now, nobody that wants to join a club would say that about one of its founding members, right? And so this is very interesting because we know that France is part of the G7, and we also know that the G7 GDP is not really pacing and keeping up with the BRICS nations' GDP output. So maybe he wants to virtue signal that he wants to show up, but I really don't think he's serious about showing interest in joining the bloc. Not only that, we see France actually condemn Russia for increasing its trade with African countries, but condemning them because they're doing more of a partner role and less of a master's role that France is used to. Yes, there's a lot of francophone countries in Africa still today that the government has to use francs and send those money to France. Now, France doesn't use francs anymore, they use euro. So this colonial contract that still exists today with the francophone African countries are not only keeping their economy basically in servitude to France, France is basically condemning Russia for not putting the boot on the neck of African countries like France have done in the past. Now, France is still requiring many of these francophone African nations to seek permission by France whether or not they can do something with their military. France still has first veto rights when it comes to exports that these francophone African countries do. So there's still a lot of colonial gamesmanship that France has till today that a lot of people are not really aware of. And so Russia may not be really in good terms with France just because, you know, France does have a chokehold on a lot of these francophone nations, and Russia won't be able to do trade with them unless these African nations go through France first to seek permission. Now, if France is serious about joining the BRICS nations, they would have to dissolve quite a few of these contracts. That way, the admittance of the francophone African nations can be accepted, and this would help with the BRICS nations' goal of developing the global south, and that definitely does include the francophone nations in Africa. But nonetheless, France is trying to put one foot at a time in towards that direction. We see that France has put up a signal towards the remaining European countries to slowly step away from the US dollar and its hegemony as it declines towards a prosperous future regarding commodity baskets. We see that France is slowly moving away from the US dollar as they sell liquefied natural gas using the Chinese yuan, hence bypassing and supporting the de-dollarization theory that's sweeping the world. We see that Europe has been taking note of this signaling as the dominoes continue to move in that direction. In addition to all of that, I also think that France will not be accepted into the BRICS nation even if they are serious about applying, is because how bad their economy is. Now, France's economy is doing terrible, and I'm not just talking about the recent protests because of their retirement age moving from 62 to 64. What I'm talking about is their debt to GDP ratio. Their actual economics is abysmal. If we were to look right now, We see that the external debt to GDP ratio of France is at 290%, which is abysmal compared to some of the other BRICS nations. If we were to look at China, China is at 17.86% external debt to GDP ratio. If we were to look at Brazil, Brazil is at 33.68% external debt to GDP ratio. If we were to look at India, India has a 21.74% external debt to GDP ratio. If we were to look to Russia, Russia has an external debt to GDP ratio of 26.66. So France's book of business is just god awful. It's just terrible. So I don't think they really want to have that because it's a ticking time bomb. And if they get accepted into this trade organization of the BRICS, then it just might be a Trojan horse. Once the economy of France blows up, it won't be European Union that will be having to pay the price or NATO. It will be BRICS. And I don't think BRICS wants those headaches. It's just not a good look, France. Man, even though France is on the bosom of a lot of West African countries, we see that they have definitely been mismanaging their funds and borrowing more they can chew. So, perhaps leaving them as a relic of the past is the best way to move forward for the BRICS nations. Now, China has definitely encouraged Germany and France and Europe to start looking towards them and the West to get them out of the funk that they're in towards a brighter future. We see President Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party have enthusiastically endorsed Macron's concept of strategic autonomy, and Chinese officials constantly refer to it in their dealings with European countries. Not only that, but we also see party leaders and theorists in Beijing are convinced that the West is in decline and China is on the ascent, and that weakening the transatlantic relationship will help accelerate this trend as well. Actually, there's another European country way more likely to be accepted into the BRICS nation and their fold rather than France, rather than Germany, way before these countries, and that country in Europe is Belarus. If you watch my other BRICS video on my channel, you'll notice that Belarus is one of the participants showing interest in entering the BRICS bloc. Now, Russia and Belarus are quite close allies, and this would allow them to have even more no restriction trades, borderless trades essentially between them, and this will bolster Belarus's economy quite well since they're quite neutral and they don't really have quite a big allegiance with any other basically organizations or conglomerate of countries out there. So Belarus would definitely benefit. There should be no barriers and no restrictions at all. This is a basic principle for building our union, and we must reach this target as soon as possible, said the president of Belarus, Lukashenko. As we see more countries show more genuine interest in joining the BRICS nation, this would not only help them with trade agreements, it would also help them trade with their own currency for those natural resources and commodities, thus helping to have other countries hold your currencies will bolster your economy, and you will have a little bit more range on economic empowerment than having to rely on US dollar and US dollar policy that is, whether you like it or not, being forced on global trade. So with countries having more range and using their own currency and exporting that out and having other countries hold that currency would strengthen that economy, because now the exorbitant privilege that the US had of exporting a lot of their inflation can happen to all countries as countries slowly move away from US dollar and the world starts to de-dollarize even more towards a multipolar, multi-currency world trade. Now, as the world slowly moves away from using the dollar for their trade, here at the US, we're not going to be very happy about that, especially with some of our closest allies moving towards China, like Saudi Arabia. As we see BRICS nations continue to receive applicants from around the world to join their bloc, we see that something that the BRICS nations would have to consider when they're drafting their policies for admittance come August would perhaps be debt to GDP ratio to be at a low level, their amount of natural resources they not only have, but are perhaps putting an infrastructure in the near future to access to continue to export and import each other's natural gases, oils, gold and silver, you name it, right? So this will help bolster the basket of currencies that will support the BRICS nations and the new development bank to get a solid return as well. As things continue to envelop, I will share that with you, so be sure to subscribe, like if you learned something new. Let me know down below if you are like me, you think that Belarus will definitely be accepted before France and Germany do, or if something else is on your mind that I've mentioned in this video. I would love to hear it. Thank you for watching Financial Almanac, and I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.